You're on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome Facebook Live and our friends on YouTube watching us on our channel. We appreciate you being here. All right, this show, we're talking about a recent government report on UFOs. My co-host, Ike Mcfadden, is joining me now. Ike, before, I guess, a few months ago, no one knew what UAP stand for. I don't think you even know what it stands for now, do you?
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, my co-host Todd. Well, it was interesting. That terminology did come along. As far as I know, we heard about the ATIP briefing stuff. We had heard some of these acronyms, but it is interesting when a commonly used acronym like that changes.
Yes. Let's face it. It's a UFO, unidentified flying object. Now the government wants to call them unidentified aerial phenomena. That just encompasses something they'd like to call a drone. For the past couple of weeks, you've had your theories on this. Your theory still is what?
I guess my theory has been that it's possible to see things, record things, have even very good evidence of things, electronic evidence, radar. But the likelihood that you are actually recording something that violates physics seems to be lower than the fact that you're just in some way misrecording something, or you're seeing something that looks like one thing but may not be. That's my best take on it.
Well, what is it? We've all given you our theories here on the Road Beyond podcast. Tonight, we've got an expert who is going to break it all down for you.
That's right. We have our old friend Derrel Sims, also known as the Alien Hunter. He is a leading expert on alien abductions. He's got 30 plus years of experience in the field and focuses on physical evidence. We love that kind of stuff, and has some very interesting discoveries on alien implants.
Derrel is also a former military police officer, and he was an operative for one of those three-letter agencies. He has a unique insight to the alien organization, which he believes functions similar to an intelligence agency. Sims is also a compassionate and skilled therapist who has helped hundreds of alien experiencers all over the world come to terms with what they've witnessed. Derrel Sims, welcome back to the show. Good to see you, my friend.
Glad to be here. Wonderful.
So, Derrel, I've got to ask you before we get into the government report, whatever it is. You're always up to something new. What have you been up to since we saw you last?
Well, all kinds of fun things. I just got back from Roswell. I've been there. I've spoken there 23 years in a row, and did some excellent presentations there, and a lot of fun. Met some really very interesting people. A couple of intelligence people were there, which was interesting. They actually identified themselves and interested in the phenomena. So this was kind of a surprise for Roswell for me. They normally don't come out and say who they are.
Is that because of this report? Is that something that they're just doing now, or do you think that sparked any of it?
I'm not really sure why they were there, other than they came to my presentation specifically. I don't know. I assume they went to others as well. But we had about an hour conversation after the fact, and it was interesting to say the very least.
Well, so Derrel, let's ask the big question. I assume you have seen the UAP report. What are your impressions of it?
The UAP report, to me, is interesting. I had some friends tell me, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this. They got these triangular shaped UFOs. They're over the ship, and it's amazing. They got it night vision." And I laughed and said, do you actually think that the government is the only group of people that can produce low grade night vision, 2 years old? They're seeing 2 and 3 of these craft, whatever they are, on each of the coast every day. Every day. I said, why can't we get something a little newer? And I said, would you like to see it in color?
Well, that's actually an interesting point. What you're asking, sort of a rhetorical question there. What is your explanation? Why can't we get something? I agree. A lot of this stuff is really not terribly new stuff. And yeah, it's certainly not the 4K quality we would like.
Oh, it's definitely not the quality. It reminds me of when they went to Mars and saw the so-called face on Mars, and then they had to wait several years to send another craft up to get better pictures, and they were more blurred than the others. And a friend of mine, who was DSP satellite specialist, said, my God, he said, we can photograph a rock at 2,700 miles up in detail. He said, I can't believe we can't picture a whole mountain for people who would like to see what it actually is.
Well, so Derrel, what are the UAPs? In your opinion, I mean, the most compelling video I've seen, and they certainly haven't released much of it to us, was from the Nimitz and also the Tic Tac videos. And you can see what appears to be some drone type object traveling at incredible rates of speed, defying physics. What are these, in your opinion? Where are they coming from?
Well, there's no question they're not ours. There's no question they're not the Russians, the Chinese, or anybody else's that we know of, so to speak. Whatever they are, they're other. To be fair, in our description of where they may be from or where they may have come from, there are all kinds of answers. The first big answer, the people with UFO hats want to throw out there, is they're from outer space. May not be. The fact is, they could be based on the quantum information. They could be from there. They could be from another dimension. There are other possibilities that really make a lot of sense if you study the serious work of Dr. Jacques Vallée and others. There may be other explanations. The fact is, wherever they come from, they didn't come from here.
Well, Derrel, let me press you again on sort of this question about the quality of the video. It sounds like you're somewhat skeptical too of like, well, why is this what we're getting? Are you implying that there is some better quality of this stuff living somewhere else that we haven't been shown? Or is the fact that it's just so low resolution, is that in itself suspicious to you? Or what do you make of that?
Well, when you're on the best ships in the world with the best equipment in the world, and you can't get anything but blurry night vision, I mean, low-grade night vision, it seems to me that based on my time in the military and also in the intelligence community, I think we have a little better quality than that. I just don't think you're, quote-unquote, have the clearance or the need to know to see it, nor do I, so to speak, anymore. And you're not going to get to see it. And the fact is, it's 2 years old. That ought to tell you something to begin with. Our pilots are reporting 2 and 3 of these a day on each of the coasts.
And that's another thing too. What I'm hearing and what I've heard is that there are other videos. There's much better quality video, and the government isn't going to release it. But I'm hearing now someone's going to release it. It's going to get leaked somehow, just like the Tic Tac video and the other videos were leaked. Do you see that happening anytime in the near future?
I do. I do see new releases of videos and so on. But the fact is that it will be timed. It will be in coordination, whether they know it or not, the ones who are exposing it, so to speak. And it will be appropriate for what they want discussed and not discussed. Look, I've been in the intelligence business before. May I make it as blunt as possible? You paid us to lie to you. Paid us. You paid the best people in the world to lie to you. Do you actually think we're going to tell you the truth now?
Yeah, not going to happen.
What do you mean? Go into a little more detail about that. I mean, that's an interesting concept. Are you saying that's just sort of the nature of intelligence organizations, or is there something specific to this situation? What do you mean by we paid you to lie to us?
Well, I mean specifically in the intelligence business, a cover story is a lie. That's just the truth of it. Roswell was a weather balloon. The first day they found it, it was a UFO. Mm-hmm. Then they changed it and came up with another cover story, the best cover story, which is it's a weather balloon. And then they changed it to other programs. It doesn't make any difference. They just keep shifting it. It doesn't matter as long you can get 20 cover stories out there, and that's just as good as the original, because then it develops theories, and then your conspiracy theorists come in and say, oh yeah, I'm absolutely positive Project Mogul. And it was, they dropped those dummies from, that's what the bodies actually were. The only problem is that story was 5 years after the fact. as the commander of that particular story said about the dummies that were dropped out of the sky, that was like 1953 when they were actually dropped. So they were floating around in space for 5 years to go back in time to be dropped. That doesn't make any sense. It's the cover story. It's just another lie.
Todd, can I get back on this for a second? So, Derrel, I'm curious about this because it reminds me of something I've wondered about in terms of intelligence agencies. It does seem to me that sometime in the more recent past, and that some of these stories seem to be increasingly implausible or just nutty. And my question to you is, so because you have a background in this, have they always been so preposterous sounding on their face? Or have we just simply, because now we all have computers in our pockets, we can kind of look stuff up and be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. What do you make of the history of that?
You're very, very sharp, and I appreciate your question. It's very, very effective, and you're on the right track. The fact is, it can be as nutty as possible. It doesn't matter, because the idea is to make the cover story more and more nonsensical. It doesn't have to make any more sense. It doesn't have to, because the event is over. Roswell's finished, so to speak, from their point of view. They're trying to cover up other stuff that's far more important than Roswell.
Derrel, it seems to me with the whole terminology of using UAP as opposed to UFO, they're trying to promote some type of agenda that these things are advanced drones. We're not sure where they come from, but they're not necessarily, they're saying they could pose a national threat. The report did say something along those lines, but they're not saying that we can't protect you from them. Is that something we're ever going to hear from them? I mean, because if they came out and said, we don't know where the hell these things are coming from, they're out there. Yeah, they're a national threat. And oh, by the way, we have nothing to protect you.
That you hit the nail right on the head. The reason you're not going to get a definitive statement from the intelligence community, the military, NSA, or anybody else like that is simply because they can't protect you. You want to go on national TV and tell the world that? We don't know where they're from. They could be from another dimension. In a plane, they could be anywhere. Yeah. And they fly faster and quicker than anything anybody's got in the world. We can't protect you. Nobody wants to hear that. I would rather hear a story like, we don't know what they are, but we're working on it, and hopefully in a few years we'll be able to find an answer for you. By that time, you may be speaking an alien language, so to speak, because you've already been conquered.
So in this sort of theory, it sounds like you're assuming that there are people who know more or know a great deal more, and it's not simply, we don't have a good answer for you. It's that they do have some answer, but it's an unpleasant answer. Is that what you're saying?
I think the answers are extremely unpleasant for those that are hiding the answers and hiding the real story. And when you're in command of literally all the intelligentsia, from every email, every piece of paper generated, and NSA's got access to every bit of that on every one of us. You're talking about enormous capabilities. They don't have to tell you anything. And the fact is, if they did, it could compromise their cover stories for the Chinese and cover stories they have out for the Russians right now. This thing is far bigger, not just from a UFO point of view, but because of other intelligence.
Derrel, let me ask you this too, and I don't think we've discussed this before, but one of the theories I've heard, which somewhat makes sense to me, when we're seeing this technology, is it could be transported here from the future. That's one theory. Do you buy into something like that? Is that something you've entertained, that maybe grays could be a form of human beings in the future that are here visiting us or experimenting on us? The same with these drones. It could be technology that's sent here going through time travel from the future.
I do not agree with that viewpoint, simply because if there was a problem, they would have already fixed it. They would have fixed it long ago. We wouldn't know about it. And this would all be literally a joke. We wouldn't even know who they were, what they were doing. The grays, in fact, the smallest ones have an IQ of approximately 80. If we evolved, quote unquote, into the future, we did a pretty sloppy job of it. These guys can't even get your clothes on right when they take you away and abduct you.
Let me harp on this intel angle a little bit more. Is there as someone who's been involved with this for a while and looked into a lot of this, is there a flavor or a giveaway to things that typically you see that get your antenna up where you think that is clearly a cover story? Or is it just totally random?
Well, two things are generally true in the UFO field. I'm going to tell you a big secret in the UFO field that's to probably get me in trouble. But the best investigators, and I'll leave it up to you to decide who those are or are not, that'll keep me out of a little bit of trouble. The best investigators are often given the bait, so to speak, a red herring. The red herring will be a discovery that's so unique and so interesting, they will be the father of it, so to speak. And the problem is that, in my opinion, the best investigators are always spoon-fed. The question is, do you know that or not? If you don't, then everything you find and discover, whether given to you by the intelligence community or by the alien, that's unique and special to you, that no one else can prove, but you seem to be able to prove, is spoon-fed, in my opinion.
From what I'm hearing, Derrel, the Tic Tac video, specifically the Nimitz video, they were leaked out from an individual. Is this something that the government wanted us to see, or did this open up a can of worms? Was this a planted story, as you've talked about before?
In my opinion, it's probably a can of worms. Since I'm not on the inside and I don't know, I would have to say it's a can of worms, and they're simply going to cover it up. One example is one conference I was in with an intelligence guy, or a guy who claimed to be. He said the disclosure is immediate. It's going to happen immediately. I said, sir, they've been waiting for you for 50 years. They got a 50-year-old cover story they're going to lay on you that's going to work like you can't believe.
Derrel, I want to ask you, switching gears, how is the chupacabra in your freezer?
Frozen. Some TV outfit called me here a while back and wanted to know if I knew about this and that and all different things. And they finally said, you ever heard about the Texas chupacabra? I said, got one in my freezer. What are you talking about? And they got real quiet. I mean, they said, you're the guy. You're the man. I said, I'm not interested.
Yeah. I haven't heard this. I mean, do you mind telling us a little bit about this?
You were gone that week. Okay. So Ike, Derrel filled in for you, Ike, when you were on vacation that week. And Derrel, you want to tell him the story about the chupacabra?
Well, first of all, filling in for him was near impossible because he's such a smart guy, and I mean that. His questions are very, very probing, excellent. The fact is that I was told by one of my people in the Houston UFO Network that a rancher had shot in South Texas a quote-unquote Texas chupacabra, Texas blue dog, whatever you want to call it. So after all that, we finally went down. I got it filmed by a former police officer friend of mine, filmed it, me going down, going through the whole machinations, getting the object, the animal that was frozen. And I asked the rancher, I said, why did you shoot it? And he said, because it was in my barn. I said, you're kind of not answering my question. What do you think it is? He said, it's a coyote, probably a coyote breed or something. I said, that you're not making sense. The animal lived in your barn. It's friends with your horse. When I was carrying it out in the sack, the horses came over, and I've got film of it. They're sniffing of it, looking for their little friend. I said, coyotes eat horses. They do things like that.
Well, so what did you, I'm sorry I missed this. It sounds great. So what did you, I assume this is something you could get tested in some fashion.
Yes. One of the tests we want to run on it through university is obviously a DNA test, find out what it is. One friend of mine who's a professional hunter for the state said, without looking at it, said, well, it's a coyote. And I said, no, sir, it's not. And his wife sat there and smiled because she's seen pictures of it. And finally, he said, yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. We've argued for a while. I pulled up pictures. He said, my God, look at the teeth on that thing. What is that? That's what I love to hear from people who already know the answers.
I'm definitely sorry I missed that. That sounds
you missed that week. See what happens when you go looking for Gulfy, the cryptid out in the Gulf of Florida.
Give it time.
Give it time. Derrel Sims, he's known as the Alien Hunter. You can check him out on the alienhunter.org. Is that where they can find you, Derrel?
Or .com, either one. They'll get me out either way.
He's got a newly refashioned website. Looks pretty good, by the way. I see you've got a lot of new things on there. And Derrel, anything that's upcoming for you that you have coming up?
Yes, there is something upcoming that's rather fascinating. I got a phone call from a couple of friends of mine telling me all about the so-called rare metals that the government's undercover looking at. And I've got the reports on them. And one of them levitated apparently in its experiment, and that the metals are very, very similar to a third one that I have found. And that metal, if it tests out to be the same as the other two, may turn out to be an amorphous metal like aluminum, which aluminum is not amorphous. It's amorphous means it's metal or glass-like. It's not crystalline.
Could these
Derrel, we'll have to talk about this again at some point, but it's interesting you mentioned levitating, and I won't go into this whole story, but I was doing a documentary with NASA at one point. This was years ago. I was in Washington. I was talking to someone from the National Space Transportation Agency, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Anyway, the cameras were off, the interview was done, and I happened to say something like, so, Area 51, is there anything to it? And he said, well, as it happens, I've got a friend who works at whatever it is, Groom Lake, and he told me the weirdest thing the last time we got together was that they knew how to levitate things. So it's just interesting you mentioned that, because I had heard an anecdotal story about that.
Well, the neat thing is these are two UFO guys that are as honest as day is long, and their metal that they saw expel from two UFOs in two different events over 20 years apart. One of them is levitating and has got both of them have remarkable qualities and been extensively tested by the government now and, of course, by other agencies.
I was going to ask if these had any relations to Roswell, because I've heard there are pieces of metal reportedly floating around there from the Roswell craft.
I can tell you another story about that. One of my friends there, a scientist buddy, he had several little pieces of what he thinks were UFO related material out of Roswell, and I had him place one of them in one of my abductees' hands, who's an extremely sensitive guy, and the guy dropped it out of his hand and said it began to hurt his hand, and then we put an intense $500 special UV light under it under different nanometer lengths, and the metals began to glow different colors. And most interesting than that, we took a FLIR and placed it over the top of that, and then filmed the FLIR showing that the metals were changing heat signatures.
Oh, wow. Incredible stuff. Derrel, you always have some great stuff with you. We want to get you on again. We look forward to it. Let us know when you have new things coming up.
I certainly will. Pete knows where I'm at, and he keeps on top of everything.
Thanks, Derrel. Thanks for being here tonight.
Surely.
All right. So, Ike, fascinating stuff, but it sounds like, you had a bit of a story on your own with dealing with NASA.
Yeah, it was just interesting to hear him say that, because as you know, I'm somewhat skeptical of this stuff, but it was odd that the one odd story I had, and this was, like I said, I was in Washington interviewing someone for a very middle of the road documentary, and then when we turned off the cameras, he brought that subject up, and I thought, well, that's interesting.
Did you ask him what else he had out at Area 51?
Yeah, actually I did. I mean, maybe we'll save that for another show. It is a somewhat interesting story for a skeptic like me.
Okay. All right. That story in the next show. Meanwhile, it's time for our news. Ike, are you ready? Here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook. Pete Haviland, you heard of that Facebook page?
Oh, yeah. It sounds real familiar to me.
Good, because you post all the articles for it. Ike, did you have a story first for us?
Like I said, I'm going to save my stories for next time. Why don't you delve right into this one? Because you told me about it earlier. I want to hear the rest of it.
Yeah, we've been talking about the Mothman, and it appears the Canadians captured Mothman, or at least there were claims of that in 1890s Quebec village. All right. This story was posted on phantomsandmonsters.com. So, on a website like that, it's got to be true. According to a press story from Joliet, Canada, on a Wednesday evening in 1892, a 23 or 35-year-old farmer, they couldn't really determine his age, he was named Joseph LaSalle. There's some argument about his age, but not his encounter. The towns of Joliet and the nearby village had been plagued by livestock, specifically lambs, being killed or carried off and eaten. Sounds terrifying. Thinking it was probably a bear, LaSalle grabbed his double-barreled shotgun and set off into the woods to shoot said predator. While tracking would-be bear, he heard a loud croaking cry above him and looked up, and what he saw in the sky was a huge eagle circling above. Creepy, right? Okay, what did he do? What do you think he did? He shot it, okay? The creature let out a scream and plummeted to the ground, but that wasn't the end of it, Ike. It was reported that the animal wasn't dead and it started to fight back. After all, he just got shot out of the sky. It's said that LaSalle unloaded the second barrel into the animal, then clubbed it to death. He finally killed the would-be Mothman. Once dead, they could not determine exactly just what it was. The body was 5 feet long and had a wingspan of 15 feet, covered with big black feathers and coarse fur on its belly. And get this, Ike, it had a tail. There you go. Tail looked like that of a calf's. The body was taken to a nearby village for display, and it was documented by several people in that village, including village officials. If that doesn't make it official, I don't know what does. The body was sent to Joliet, and believe it or not, Ike, it was never seen again.
Yeah, well, that story violates pretty much everything we know about biology, evolutionary biology, physiognometry, phylogeny,
they're Canadian.
Weather. I mean, no, I don't see any problem with any of that.
Okay. Yeah, Canadian whiskey. They invented that while they were up there.
Well, I want to hear, another, one of our true believers, producer Pete. What do you, I mean, to my mind, fur, feathers, tail, lizard claws, it seems unlikely.
Pete?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
Take a guess. Take a guess. How might you explain this, assuming it's not mental illness?
I sounds like Canadian mist.
Canadian swamp gas?
Here's the deal. Okay.
Balloon? Is a balloon? Weather balloon?
Back in the day, they reported things.
Well, it's definitely not Cthulhu.
Okay, here we go. All right. Once again, the show is taking a drastic right turn into hell. Okay, there you go. All right. Now what? Our director's going to pipe in. Nathan, did you want to jump in there? No. He's always interested. Okay. Thank you, Nathan. All right. Thank you, Pete, for enlightening us. Ike, you want to remind everybody about our social media?
Yes, we are every week on Facebook and YouTube, usually live, more or less, and then we post everything on YouTube later. So if you want to go back, refer to check and see if we actually did say what we said. And we also have, I believe, a Twitter account, is it, and a Instagram account. So make sure you subscribe. You'll get notifications, and you don't ever want to miss it because you just never know where this thing's going.
You never know what we're going to say. And I'm catching up with Ike this weekend. I think I'm going to be up in the hills of Tennessee. So
I changed my mind.
Okay,
go away.
That's over with. All right, Pete. Looks like we're stuck here in Houston. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. Pete, we'll see you next week. Nathan, as always, thank you. Ike, just try to prepare for the next show.
See you then.
All right. Thanks, folks. We'll see you next time.